What really happened with your host, Mike Rivero, because World War III is a really bad idea. Here is your host, Michael Rivero.
And aloha, America. Welcome to our show today. It is Wednesday, June 7th, 2017, hump day, middle of the weekday, starting that long, slow glide down to Pauhana Friday. And boy, do we have lots of stuff to talk about today. A lot of things coming to a head. We got the general election in Britain tomorrow. We've got Comey's getting ready to testify, and everybody's already second-guessing what he's going to say and spinning it before it even comes out of his mouth for their various political game. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. Mike is in our control room ready to answer the phone when you call on in. A couple of quick program notes. Tomorrow in our third hour, we will have Phil Turney and Dave Gahary talking about Israel's attack on the USS Liberty. And following that, on the National Intel Report, Phil Turney will be continuing at the microphone as the guest host for that show. This is the 50th anniversary of Israel's attack on the USS Liberty. A lot of attention being paid to it everywhere except, of course, the Israeli government, the U.S. government, and the American corporate media who are out there still. Oh, it was an accident, really. It was a mistaken identity. Israel thought it was this Egyptian horse carrier because we all know Egyptian horse carriers have dish antennas all over them. More about that tomorrow here. Now, getting into the news here, James Clapper is already out there doing TV interviews saying that the Trump-Russia link is a bigger scandal than Watergate. Watergate just pales beside it, and he's out there just trying to sell this thing. And he did this interview before today's hearing before the Senate committee. And basically, I watched the Senate hearings, and all these people were out there saying, no, they never felt any pressure from Trump over the Russia probe. Now, when they were pressed for specific conversations, Rogers and Coates said, well, I'm not sure that I can go into that. And already the corporate media is trying to spin it that, oh, ho, they're covering up for the president. There's something evil going on there. And if the anti-Trumpers are hoping for a 1-2 knockout between today and Comey's hearing tomorrow, it doesn't look like it's really going to happen. They're not getting the smoking gun impeachable evidence. And the intelligence chiefs basically were out there saying, no, that they felt no pressure from Trump administration on the Russia probe. The original headline at CNN was intelligence chiefs, no pressure from Trump administration on Russia probe. They now already changed that to say, oh, they won't talk about it. They're obviously hiding something here. Now, as far as Comey himself, apparently what he's going to say is already leaking on out. He's going to basically read this very long prepared statement. He is not going to claim that Donald Trump obstructed justice. He's not going to claim that Trump asked him to back off on any investigation. His one bone of contention is he's going to push back against Trump's assertion that Comey told Trump 3 times he isn't under investigation. There's nothing there. A verbal misunderstanding. That's it. They've tried to turn this into this big, huge stink, and it's falling apart on them. Meanwhile, things are heating up over there in the Middle East. It's clearly a chaotic situation. It could explode the whole region into war. It could fracture OPEC. It just seems to have come out of nowhere. Of course, we know that that never really happens. The Saudis are basically demanding total surrender. Qatar may not go along with that. I mean, the Qatar's rulers have to stay faced with their own people and their own political structure. And apparently there are 10 demands Saudi Arabia has made of Qatar. The blockade is already in effect. The blockade has started. And apparently they've given Qatar 24 hours to submit to these 10 demands. There's a rumor, this is not yet confirmed, one of the demands is the dismantling of Al Jazeera, breaking off of all relations with Iran, and of course ending support for the Muslim Brotherhood and especially Hamas. And the Saudis are threatening a military invasion. And Donald Trump is out there, or at least he was. He's backing off. He was trying to take credit for getting the Saudis to move against Qatar because of this comment that he made on the trip to the Middle East, where he seemed to imply that Qatar was funding these fundamental Islamist jihadis. And I guess Saudi Arabia is very, very upset that Qatar is funding the Islamists the same way Saudi Arabia has been doing it. I guess maybe Saudi Arabia feels Qatar's cutting in on their action. It's a little turf war. This is, that's our turf. We're doing this over here. We've got the license. This is our turf. Israel, to nobody's surprise, is backing Saudi's latest confrontation with Qatar and basically fanning it toward everybody's favorite enemy, Iran. Oh, this may be the opportunity to get the war against Iran that we have been wanting all along. So you've got Israel, Trump are saying this is a good thing, and they're all getting ready to see things happen in Qatar. There is one small consideration they ought to take into account, and that is Yemen, which is showing the world that for all their modern advanced weapons, the Saudis are not motivated fighters. They really are not strongly inclined to march into a neighboring Arab Muslim nation and kill people. And that may prove to be a problem. Qatar could actually turn into another quagmire. Now, because of the blockade, everybody in Qatar is panicking. They've emptied the supermarket stores. Their stock market is down. The value of their currency is down. And everybody's emptied out their bank accounts. Iran is already organizing a humanitarian supply mission to just fly from Iran to Qatar with plane loads of food, medicine, whatever else is needed. Now, this is going to be very, very tricky because it's one thing to have a naval blockade to prevent military weapons and other supplies coming on in. Shooting down a humanitarian aid flight, that's a very, very dicey thing to do diplomatically, although it's entirely possible Saudi Arabia might do it. Because, again, it's looking like this is an attempt to get into the war against Iran here. Now, meanwhile, there's been a lot of backlash because over on Qatar, there are these military bases that are being used by the United States. In particular, an air base and some 11,000 U.S. soldiers are inside Qatar right now. Now, what is Qatar going to do with them? Are they going to round them up? Are they going to put them in a cage? They can't just let them stand there. The U.S. could order them to march on the capital. But they're very, very concerned about Qatar saying, get your assets out of here at a time when they're still trying to project power across that Gulf here. And so diplomats are trying to back off from Donald Trump's diplomatic damage, and they're doing it by trying to blame Russia. That's it. That's the fall guy. No matter what goes wrong, it's all Russia's fault. And U.S. investigators are claiming that Russian hackers posted pro-Iran messages in the Qatar media, falsely attributed, and blah, blah, blah. So they're trying to say this is all a misunderstanding and it's all Russia's fault, and everybody ought to just calm on down. But it looks like it's gone a little too far for that. Turkey's already approved a bill. They're sending troops to Qatar. Assad's military alliance is basically threatening strikes against U.S. forces in Syria because Syria's been attacked because the U.S. has been attacking their forces over these so-called deconfliction zones, which aren't legitimate. The United Nations Security Council hasn't approved them. Damascus hasn't approved them. This is just the U.S. government arbitrarily going into another country, drawing some lines and saying, you stay out of here. It's now our toif. Now, Vladimir Zabarov, the first deputy chairman of the Russian Upper House International Affairs Committee, is saying that these reports that Russian hackers caused this ruckus in Qatar, it's an attempt to pit the U.S. and Russia against each other, to just keep up that enemy thing here. And before we get too much further on down there, we need to remember 3 times we were being told Russians were responsible for a hack, and it went nowhere. And before I give you the details on that, we're going to do a shout-out to our on-air affiliates who are just now rejoining our network. And for those of you who were with us yesterday, the phones are working today, so feel free to call on in. Now, remember there was that French cyber security leader, no trace of Russian hacking in the Macron campaign, and they were claiming Russia had hacked that. Turned out that never happened. Remember the shadow brokers hack? That was blamed on Russia, and then they turned out it was a guy in Maryland who did it. And then there was that big story last year about how the Russians penetrated the U.S. electric grid, and they got into the grid up at a power station in Vermont, and it turned out there was some malware on a laptop completely unconnected to the grid, unconnected to the generating station, and they're not even sure it came from Russia. They're just pushing this idea, Russian hacker, Russian hacker, Russian hacker. So here we are with this possible war between Saudi Arabia and Qatar, and so immediately the U.S. government leaps into action by voting to impose more sanctions on Russia and Iran. That'll teach Qatar. That'll teach those Qataris. We'll put more sanctions on Russia and Iran. All right, we're going to take a phone call. Jim in Chicago, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Michael, regarding Iran, what happened today, do you think someone did it so there can be more battles in the Middle East? And also, do you think maybe Israel, the United States, or Britain were the ones that were behind it, even though ISA is taking credit for it?
Well, again, ISIS appears to be a manufactured proxy group. We know the
right.
U.S. has been supplying them and supporting them. We know that they've got a huge propaganda machine. So it's almost like it's all one big group. It's all
so
one.
Who do you think's behind?
Well, I think ultimately it's the Western powers, mostly the United States. The Project for the New American Century that's driving all of this stuff forward.
So do you think Iran is just going to sit there and take it, or do you think they're going to take some actions on their own?
Well, again, Iran is trying to play it cool. Iran, by their nature, is not a warmongering country. It's been over 200 years since Iran invaded another country in a war of conquest and aggression. So, like Putin, they're trying to play it cool. They know the Americans are coming for them. And right now, in the court of world opinion, it is very important that Iran not be goaded into an overt act that can be seized on as a justification for escalating the war. So I think basically they're going to sit on back and wait for the West to make an overt move. And yes, this attack on their parliament building, it's had an effect on their stock market. It's clearly a provocation. But again, the goal is to get Iran to do something where they're hitting American forces, where the U.S. can say, well, Iran has started the war. We must respond.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you very much, Michael.
All right. Thanks an awful lot. We're going to let you go here. Now, getting on to the domestic political scene, there are, again, more rumors and leaks coming out of the White House that Donald Trump is very unhappy with Attorney General Jeff Sessions for recusing himself from the Russian witch hunt, which resulted in the appointment of this special prosecutor, who so far is coming up empty. And again, based on the hearings this morning and what we're expecting to hear from Comey tomorrow, this whole Russia conspiracy is falling apart. It was a fairy tale, is what it was. And so I'm hoping that Trump and Sessions will kiss and make up. Meanwhile, there is a huge story that is coming on out, and it involves a lawsuit being brought forward by a former U.S. intelligence contractor, Dennis Montgomery. And he discovered evidence, vast amounts of evidence, that the NSA and the CIA have been illegally spying on over 20 million Americans. He's got the names. And he went through all the legal procedures to blow the whistle and try and resolve the matter to no avail. And now he's filing lawsuit against Comey for covering this all up. And apparently this guy is saying that he has copies of huge amounts of information, even more than Snowden, 600 million classified documents on hundreds of hard drives that he has very, very well hidden. And apparently one of the aspects of this is that the raw intelligence about these American citizens were shared by the FBI with unauthorized third parties, including foreign entities. Now, Donald Trump has announced that he is going to appoint a former Justice Department official, and somehow I forgot to get the actually forgot to get the name in here. Trump has got nominating a Justice Department official and New Jersey Governor Chris Christie's personal lawyer during the George Washington Bridge lane closing investigation. And so Trump is nominating Christopher Wray, who has a very long track record. He's a white-collar defense lawyer strong law enforcement background. He certainly knows more about law enforcement than Comey did. That's Trump's pick to head the FBI, and he looks like he's a serious guy. I mean, he's not going to put up with a lot of political guff here. A lot of people are still talking about the latest investigation and scandal to hit Teflon Hillary, or maybe Velcro Hillary this time. And it has to do with this corruption scandal out in Bangladesh and its involvement with the Clinton Foundation. And everybody's saying this one might actually stick. And it might, because as I mentioned, I think it was back on Monday, I think what's going on here, everybody's sick and tired of Hillary Clinton. They want her to just go away. She's out there on the speaking tour thing again. She's making ridiculous statements like we can end terrorism by understanding other cultures' food. And they want her to go away. She is an albatross around the neck of the Democratic Party going into next year's midterms and certainly going into 2020. They want her to go away. But they don't want to risk exposing the really bad scandals that could bring down the entire government. So they're picking this little fringe issue. And I think they're really going to go after her on this one. And they're just going to send a message. We're going to protect the big, deep, dark, ugly secret, and you are gracefully going to retire from public life over this one. I don't know. Given Hillary Clinton's displays of anger and rage, she might actually do something very, very reckless indeed. Because certainly the Hillary we saw after she lost the election did not present the image of Zen-like calm in the face of adversity here. But they're still looking at that one. We all want the Clintons to go away. They belong to a previous, darker age. And it is time for everybody to move on here. Now then, let's get on back to the terror attack at London Bridge. You saw the headlines immediately afterwards. Oh, we've arrested this person, we've arrested that person, we've arrested that person. Apparently, everybody who was arrested in connection with the London Bridge terror attack has now been released without any charges. This is according to TASS. And even more interesting, coming on out from Blacklisted News, the ISIS recruiter who radicalized the London Bridge attackers is now confirmed as having been protected by MI5. This was a false flag. They recruited these guys, they got them all worked up, and they sent them on out to be patsies. Because they needed a terror attack, probably to sway the election tomorrow. All right, I'm going to take a phone call. James in Tokyo. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Mikael. How are you? Hope you're doing well, and Claire is doing well.
We're doing fine here.
That's great. You know, I've been to Qatar, and excuse my language, I think it's a real shithole.
I wish you would watch your language, because that's a problem for our on-air broadcasters, okay?
Yes, sir. Yeah, I was there like a little over a year ago from India. I got a good friend of mine living there, and it's kind of like a Wahhabi type of place, except they give women a little more rights, like they let them drive a car. That's about all they do, you know. But if you go to like a convenience store or anything, there are like separate registers for men and women, and it's a really messed up place. And I felt really bad for my friend because she was there with her husband because he lost his job in London, and he had to work there, and she had to follow him, you know, to just survive.
We're almost to the commercial break. You need to wrap this up.
Anyway, Seth Rich, what do you think is going to go down with that? I think things are coming out, and everything is going to start happening from now on.
Well, we're literally seeing the truth activists getting the truth out there to the public, and the government and the corporate media just steadfast in trying to pretend that there's nothing there. It's degenerated down to personal insult and innuendo and calling us all conspiracy wackos, but they've worn that card out. I'll have more about this when we come back from the commercial. Thank you for the phone call. We need to take a break for some words from our sponsors. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And in response to James' comment about what's going to be done about Seth Rich, officially, nothing. In the corporate media, nothing. The official story has been put on out, and they are all sticking to it. And you know something? all they're really doing is continuing to make themselves irrelevant to the American people. Because we have seen through the decades all of these assassinations and cover-ups and corruption, and we know what's really going on. And the U.S. government and the corporate media are looking more and more like a small child insisting they've done nothing wrong, while the remains of the broken vase are still on the floor around their feet. The government and the media have record low credibility scores in poll after poll after poll, and as they continue to lie and spin and stonewall, it's only going to get worse until we reach a point where the government simply cannot function any longer because nobody's going to listen to them. Why would we bother? Why take the risk of being made a total fool of again? After decades of being made total fools of in the eyes of the rest of the world. Now, getting on back to the London bombing, and Theresa May, her solution is, we're going to put censorship on the Internet because, by golly, we know the Internet is the source of all these jihadis and terrorists and everything. Actually, most of the jihadi material on the Internet is propaganda that's manufactured to ramp up the booga booga, keep us all scared of the terrorists. And they're trying to use the terrorism to push the war agenda, to push the censorship agenda. At the same time, there's a pushback from the open borders agenda, saying, no, we can't do anything. So you can see where they're working at cross purposes here. Now, a story coming out of Investment Watch blog calls for internment of suspected terrorists are becoming more prevalent, not just in Great Britain, throughout Europe and America. They're saying, look, we shouldn't have changed the rules. It used to be if you wanted asylum in the United States of America, you would apply first, and then when it was granted, you would come on over. With the open borders, people, it's just flood on in and fill out the paperwork somewhere down the road. And obviously that has caused problems for all these countries. We need to close those borders. Donald Trump is absolutely right. If you accept the official story of the Manchester bombing and the attack on London Bridge and the attack on the Iranian parliament and all the rest of it, then you have to agree that controlling who comes through our borders is a national priority right now. All right, we're going to take a really quick phone call. Mike in Alaska. What's on your mind today?
Mike, it used to be that you have to stay in the country when you were going to apply to become a refugee. You can't just walk on in and then do it later.
That's the way it used to be, yes.
And I'm wondering what changed, and I'm kind of thinking that Europe, a lot of these people, they've got a weird mentality that they can tell things are not right, and they think, that these people have to go or have to stop coming in, first of all, but they kind of want to see everyone in the same boat as they are. They kind of want them to be in the U.S. as well, and it's kind of this weird perversion that the British Empire's over, and Europe is kind of stagnant as far as economic growth.
It is, and the American Empire's in decline as well.
Yeah, join us in our sorrow, kind of a thing.
I'm not sure that that's really that much of a factor, but again, in all these countries, the ordinary people are seeing the disconnect between what their corporate media is telling them, all the blessings of open borders, and what they're seeing with their own eyes is obviously the downside. And so it is not just the United States where the people have lost trust and confidence in their government and their corporate media. It's happening all over the globe right now. And that actually, in the long run, could be a very, very good thing. And we might actually have to develop new forms of governance that are forced to learn how to govern without lying to everybody. Because that obviously is a better way to go than constantly deceiving your own people. Because eventually that burden of accumulated lies builds to a point where it is going to bring the whole thing down. Anyway, Mike, we've got to take another break for commercials, and we will be right back. Thank you for the call. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. Getting on back to Great Britain and the potential, in fact almost guaranteed impact of the Manchester bombing and the London Bridge attacks on tomorrow's election. There's a lot of turmoil going on within the British government. And apparently they're talking about changing the leadership vote rules in Parliament. And they're basically saying that Jeremy Corbyn, if he doesn't win the prime ministership, that he just needs to get out completely. They don't want him around anymore for some reason. Now let's get on to Syria, because things are getting really hot down there. Russia has now set up its own red lines inside Syria and is warning the U.S. not to cross them. Because apparently when the U.S. attacked pro-Syrian government forces, they also hit some Iranian militia and some other individuals who weren't really supposed to be targeted. And Russia is pointing out correctly that the self-proclaimed deconfliction zones are illegitimate. They are not recognized by Damascus or the United Nations Security Council. It's just the United States government arbitrarily drawing a border and say, you stay out of here. We're in charge now. This is our territory. We're in control of the gambling and prostitution and drugs here. Now, the Syrian army is going up against ISIS in Palmyra. There's some video that came out from that, very pitched battle. They're actually making a lot of progress in getting back these key areas of Syria back under the Syrian government control. Meanwhile, the Pentagon is acknowledging hundreds of U.S. troops are involved in the military campaign to recapture the city of Raqqa. And we've got boots on the ground. We're back to fighting in another Arab country's soil, uninvited as usual. And that is something that everybody needs to keep in mind. These countries don't want the United States there. The U.S. has been trying to get Assad out of power for 5 years. Assad does not want the United States in his country. He has not given the United States permission to be in his country. By any reasonable definition of an invasion, the United States has invaded Syria by planting military bases on the soil, sending in troops, sending in bombing missions. Now, because of this recent U.S. attack on pro-Syrian government forces, Russia is calling for an extraordinary Security Council meeting. They want to get together now and say, this has to be resolved. Now, of course, the U.S. has a right of veto over anything the Security Council may do, but Russia is playing the game by the rules. They're playing the game by international law. And international law is against the actions of the government of the United States of America. And we all need to keep that in mind. The rules exist for a reason. The rules are what hold together civilization. When you have a government that no longer plays by the rules, you are a civilization clearly in decline. That's one of the most telling indicators you have. When the government itself says, we're above the rules, we're above the law, we don't have to obey the Constitution or the Bill of Rights or international law, we're free to torture and spy and do whatever we feel is necessary, that is a civilization in decline. We're going to grab ourselves a phone call now. Dustin in New Jersey, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yeah, hi, Mike. Mike, so much is happening, my head's spinning around like Linda Blair from The Exorcist.
Oh, my goodness, that's terrible.
Well, this whole, look at the geopolitical shifting going on, like right before our eyes. Never seen anything before like this in our history, right?
No, we haven't. And again, if you look at the world before the official start of World War II, you'll see pretty much the same thing. There were all these regional conflicts. Japan had gone into Manchuria. Germany was going into Poland and everything. And it does feel very much like that. It does feel like, unfortunately, tragically, World War III is now unavoidable. And, of course, that's a personal failure for me, because that's been a big part of what we've been doing at WhatReallyHappened.com for the last 20 years, is trying to head off this insane rush to war.
Yeah, there's too many pieces moving around too quick, you know? There's just too much stuff happening, and somebody's going to make a fatal mistake. I mean, the Russians need to start doing some air cover for these convoys and putting like a Tor M2NA aircraft battery in with the columns and something. Because
No. The last thing Putin wants to do, or let me rephrase that, the last thing that Putin should want to do is get into any kind of a situation where you're going to have American forces and Russian forces in direct conflict with each other. We've seen the U.S. trying to goad Russia into doing something with all these flights along the Russian border up in the Black Sea. They're trying to get Putin to do something where they can say, aha, we're now in a state of war.
But he can't keep letting these convoys get hit, because then ISIS will just, it's just going to keep going on forever.
Well,
there's going to come a point when it's going to be enough's enough,
I'm afraid you're right, and unfortunately a lot of what we're seeing develop right now, like the situation in Qatar, it seems to be much less well thought out strategic policy and more of a shoot from the hip, let's kick this over and see what happens kind of thinking, and that can be very dangerous. But you're right, the first hothead mistake, the first dumb, idiotic mistake, and the bullets are going to be flying in all directions, and eventually the nuclear weapons.
I have to give Erdogan credit, though. That was a great move by sending his troops to the base over there.
Well,
very smart move.
Well, he's getting kicked out. Germany is having to take their troops from the Incirlik air base. Jordan has already agreed they're going to take them in. So Germany will still be in the region, just slightly different.
Germany's the largest, that's pretty much the largest force in Incirlik, I think, right? Like the German force?
Yeah, it is. That's pretty much there. The U.S. is also using it, but I think the U.S. has already gotten out of there.
So we're out of Turkey, going to be out of Qatar soon. Definitely losing empire there, if anybody can tell.
Well, unfortunately, it looks like it almost feels like sooner or later, well, they're going to take Qatar. It almost feels like they're building up to try a direct takeover of Turkey. The coup d'etat failed, but they're not going to quit. They want Turkey brought back in to the empire.
All right, thanks a lot, Mike.
All right, thank you, Dustin. We're going to switch over to Sherry in Fredericksburg. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Thank you, Mike. Yeah, I just want to reiterate something. There was a time when Russia was in a position that we're in now, and Putin's country has suffered so much more than we've ever known here in America, and I don't know how bad it will get, but I hope Putin understands that we're just trying to be free. We're trying to be free, and
well, we lost that fight.
I hope our end result will be as successful as Russia's end result has been.
Mm-hmm.
But they've got their military preparedness going for them and everything, and I just want to say again that we need them. We need them. And I hope, I know there's a limit to what Russia can do, given that we're so aggressive, but we'll keep on keeping on, but we're in a bad position, and I hope we're successful, since Russia could tell us a few things,
Well, yeah.
We haven't known war here.
Well, not since the Civil War.
That's true.
Okay.
That's right. Yes. I just want to reiterate those things because they're just important to me.
Okay.
I mean, that's really all I wanted to say is they've been in our position, and I think they'd be there for us if we'd lay off. You know what I mean? If we would lay off, rather, harassing them.
I'm sure Putin would love to go back to being friends. I mean, after the fall of the Soviet Union and the new Russian republics came on up, everybody was buddy-buddy. And everything was fine. We were doing trade. We were doing deals. Everything was doing really great until Putin decided he was going to take direct government control of Russia's private central bank. Now, it's still privately owned, but it is now run by the government in order to manage Russia's public currency as a public utility. And that was the day that all of a sudden Russia went back to being the bad, evil people, and it was a threat to private central banks everywhere, a threat to dollar hegemony, along with China's yuan. And that's really what it's all about. If you look at it from a purely economic situation, the United States has allowed its manufacturing to decline in quantity and quality over the last 30 years. Nobody wants our GMO agriculture. And right now, forcing the world to use the U.S. dollar for global trade and banking and charging them interest or asking them to send us manufactured goods and agricultural produce for boxes of ink and paper, that's the only thing holding the economy up. And if Russia and China and the rest of the world stop using the dollar internationally, That's it. There's nothing left to hold up the U.S. economy. And maybe Putin is thinking that he just has to wait it out, that an economic crash is inevitable, and that the U.S. government will be brought down by it, just the way the Soviet Union was brought down by their unpayable debt. And we'll hit the reset button, and we'll have a new American republic.
Well, that's what I'm hoping, that he'll wait it out and know how much we're trying to get our act together in the face of all this corruption. And I just wanted to say that, so in case he's listening. Okay?
Well, I expect that probably somebody on behalf of the Russian government is listening to this
yes,
show.
That's what I mean.
I'm sure representatives of a lot of governments are listening to this show, taking little furtive notes about, he said bad things about it. All right, well, listen, Sherry, we're going to let you go.
Thank you, Mike.
And again, revealing that there is a lot of Great War thinking going on in the bowels of power. Apparently, a former CIA Deputy Chief of the Balkan Task Force, Stephen Mayer, is out there saying it's time to redraw the Balkan borders again. In other words, go on into these other nations and redraw the borders of the former Yugoslavia in response to the emergence of the so-called Greater Albania. Albania is now a problem. We've got to deal with it. And again, it's this arrogance of we have a right to go on in and muck about with other people's countries. And I'll tell you very, very simply, people don't like to have their countries mucked about with. It's that simple. They're trying to do the best that they can in their own country. They don't need outsiders coming on in and trying to carve it on up and loot the natural resources and try and bring the American system of privatized everything to plunder the people. Now, there's a story over in Sputnik News where Israel is gearing up for an attack from Hezbollah, which means Israel is gearing up to fake an attack from Hezbollah so they can go back into Lebanon while the world is watching what's going on over in Qatar. Because Israel likes to do that. When the world is distracted somewhere else, they make a move and they still want that Litani River. Absolutely want that Litani River. Meanwhile, Nikki Haley is running around the United Nations and saying that we're not going to allow the United Nations to bully Israel anymore. Clearly, the United Nations are anti-Semitic. If it was any other country that was committing genocide and ethnic cleansing, they wouldn't pay attention. They're only paying attention to Palestine because they hate the Israelis. It is rather embarrassing and humiliating to me as an American citizen to see our ambassador to the United Nations groveling to a foreign government. Now, the Pentagon is waving around the flags and up in arms over the fact that Beijing is now arming its man-made islands in the South China Sea. And apparently they're putting in runways, airplane hangars. They don't know exactly what's going on in there, but the attitude is, obviously they're fortifying and arming these man-made islands. Well, with the U.S. invading everything in sight, and leading the harangue that China no longer owns that part of the ocean, even though it was set forth in treaties at the end of World War II that was all their territory. Wouldn't you be arming up? Wouldn't you be buying guns? There's this very bizarre attitude we see from the Pentagon and indeed much of the entire administration that other countries shouldn't have a right to defend themselves from U.S. invasion. And that is ludicrous. It is absolutely ludicrous. Now, meanwhile, it is beginning to look like that tensions over North Korea may be backing off. First of all, the president of South Korea has now halted the deployments of the Terminal High Altitude Area Defense Missile Systems. They're all being put back on their trailers, put back in their trucks. He said, shut them down. Absolutely shut them down. And it's good that he's showing a firm hand when it turns out much of his military high command is more sympathetic to the U.S. than to their own government. But they are being shut on down, and President Moon Jae-in is, again, seems to be moving forward. He wants to reach his hand across that DMZ to Kim Jong-un and say, let's calm this down. Neither one of us needs the U.S. coming on in and messing this place up again like they did all those years ago. So as a result, the U.S. aircraft carriers Ronald Reagan and the Carl Vinson have moved away from the Korean Peninsula. Now, they're still, according to the Navy's website, they're still in the area of the Sea of Japan, but they're on their way back. Now, the Carl Vinson is eventually going to return to the home port in the U.S. city of San Diego, and the Reagan is their area of operation is over in the Western Pacific, so they're going to continue there. But it looks like they're kind of pulling back a little bit. They didn't get their little war in North Korea. They didn't get their backdoor to war with China, which is, I guess, why they're ramping up on Qatar. We couldn't get North Korea. It was going to be too much of a problem. We can whip Qatar. Anybody can whip Qatar. My grandmother could whip Qatar with her hand tied behind her back. My grandfather could whip Qatar with his breath. Now, as you know, Vladimir Putin is giving a series of interviews to Megyn Kelly, which didn't work out too well. And he's giving a lot of interviews to film director Oliver Stone. And one of the interesting things that Putin came on out and said, and I absolutely wholeheartedly agree with him, we do not want war with the U.S. because nobody on earth would survive it. And he is absolutely correct. When you look at the total nuclear and biological and chemical arsenals of the United States of America and Russia, we're talking extinction-level event. The problem we have here in the United States of America is the U.S. government has spent a huge amount of money over the last 2 decades building all these underground bunkers. They actually think they're going to nuke the surface of planet Earth in this argument over whose brand of ink and paper we're all going to use. Then they're going to go on down to their bunkers, and they're just going to live down there for a year or two, and then they come on up, and it's going to be beautiful and natural world, and it's all going to be wonderful, and no, it isn't. I think the movie and book On the Beach is a more accurate prediction of what will happen. We're going to take a break for commercials, and we'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. Now, as you know, every once in a while we start hearing all this talk over in Brussels about a grand army of the European Union. And, of course, the member states of the European Union are very nervous about that because Brussels continues to mutate into this tyrannical structure. Remember, the European Union was originally all about a free travel, free trade zone. No internal borders. That was it. It was all about trade. That was it. And over time, Brussels has basically enshrined itself as this all-powerful centralized government, which was never intended at the beginning, a lot like the United States itself. When the Founding Fathers set up the United States of America, it was a confederation of independent states, and the central government was basically an arbiter between the states, and that was it. And over time, the central government has acquired more power and taken more authority away from the states, especially after the Civil War. You should go back and read all the amendments to the Constitution that were passed right after the Civil War. It is an eye-opener. And the same thing happened in the European Union. Now, over in the European Union, they're talking about having a single European Union army to become a second NATO. They want to be a second NATO, a force to be reckoned with. Well, there's a couple of problems with that. First of all, most of the European Union member states are already part of NATO. If they are required to support a second NATO, it means dividing the available resources. They're not just going to come up with more money to fund a second copy of NATO. And a lot of the EU member states are really not all that happy with NATO anywhere. So, again, this is just another power grab by the Eurocrats to try and build a single united Europe with a single European army with which to go on out and muck about with other people's countries. All right, we're going to take a phone call from Mark in North Carolina. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
How you doing, Mike?
Doing all right.
Mike, said you were talking about. Did you say that to Megyn Kelly?
No, he said it to Oliver Stone. He said it to Oliver Stone.
To Oliver Stone?
Yeah.
When was that interview?
Well, apparently Putin has been giving Oliver Stone a whole series of interviews. I guess maybe Oliver Stone is looking at doing a film about him now that he's got this one about Barry Seal is about to come on out. And by the way, I looked at the blurb for the Barry Seal movie, and it talks about his drug smuggling and all the rest of it. Not a mention of Iran, Contra, not a mention of Arkansas or MENA. We'll see what's in the actual movie, whether it's as revealing and accurate as JFK was. But I have a feeling...
It's going to be it's going to be a movie with actors, or is it going to be like a documentary?
No, it's a movie with actors. In fact, I think Tom Cruise is going to play Barry Seal. I'm not sure about that, but I think that's what I heard.
Oh, wow. When is it coming out? I hope soon.
Yeah, it's coming out this summer. Okay, listen, we
wow.
got to let you go. Got to take a break for station identification, and we'll be right back.